My name is Maria, and I am 26 years old. For most people, 26 is a bright age, full of plans, opportunities, friends, and dreams. But for me, life has never been a wide, open road. It feels more like a narrow path between tall buildings, a place where sunlight must fight to reach the ground. I live in a huge, restless city, a city that never stops moving even when you stand still. Every morning, thousands of people hurry past me, yet I feel invisible among them, like a small shadow no one notices. I work as a street artist, though the word artist sounds more beautiful than my daily reality. I paint shop signs. I paint small flowers on cafe windows. I paint faded walls to make them look alive again. It is honest work, but the pay is tiny, barely enough to survive. Still, I keep going. I save every coin. I mend my old clothes again and again. I eat simple food, sometimes too simple. On some nights, the only thing I have for dinner is a cup of water and the hope that tomorrow will be kinder. But I do not complain. I have learned to carry silence like a coat. Life taught me early to hold my tears until no one is watching. My parents died when I was still a child, and the world after that felt cold and wide. I grew up learning that love was something other people had, not me. I have no brothers or sisters, no relatives to visit, no friends to call. My world is small, just my work, my brushes, and my room. And my room. It is hardly a room at all. It is so tiny that if I stand up, there is no space left to sit down. One bed, one chair, one little table. A weak fan that pushes hot air in summer and does nothing in winter. The walls are thin. When it rains, I hear every drop like a heartbeat reminding me I am alone. Yet even in that small, tired room, I wake up each morning and tell myself, try again. One cold, wet morning, I was painting the window of a small cafe at the corner of the street. The rain fell in thin silver lines, sliding down the glass as my brush moved slowly between them. My clothes were soaked. My hands felt stiff from the cold. Still, I worked, because work meant survival. I was almost finished when the door of the cafe opened. A man stepped inside, slowly, carefully, as if the world might break beneath his feet. He had gray hair, a long black coat, and eyes that seemed to hold stories I could not yet understand. I lowered my gaze quickly. I did not want to talk. But that moment, quiet, simple, unexpected, was the beginning of everything that would change my life. The first time I truly noticed him, the rain had softened into a quiet mist, the kind that settles on your skin like a whisper. The man with the gray hair moved slowly toward the table near the door of the cafe, his steps careful, almost thoughtful. He seemed to belong to another era, someone carved from calmness, someone who had lived long enough to understand the weight of silence. I kept painting, pretending not to see him, but from the corner of my eye I could feel his gaze. Not sharp, not intrusive, just observant. When I finally finished the last stroke on the window, I began to clean my brushes. That was when he stood and walked toward me. Up close, he looked around 65, maybe a little older. His coat was long and black, worn but clean. His eyes were gentle, the kind you only find in people who have spent years learning how to be patient. "You look very tired," he said softly. His voice surprised me. It was calm, warm, and steady, like a cup of tea held between cold hands. I forced a small smile. "It's just been a long morning." He nodded slowly, as if he understood more than I had said. "You work very hard," he murmured, then quietly turned and left the cafe without another word. I stood there holding my brushes, unsure why that simple moment lingered in my chest long after he disappeared into the rain. The next day, I was painting a wall near the same cafe when I saw him again. He walked by, saw me, and smiled. Not the polite smile strangers give each other, but a smile that carried warmth. I hesitated, then gave a small smile back. He lifted his hand in a tiny wave before entering the cafe. A few minutes later, he came out holding a steaming cup. He approached me carefully. "This is warm," he said. "Please drink it." I froze for a second. No one had ever brought me tea before. Not like this, not with such simple kindness. Thank you, I whispered, taking the cup. The tea warmed my hands first, then my throat, then something deeper inside me. I didn't understand the feeling, only that it was unfamiliar. The next morning he returned again, this time with tea and a small piece of bread. You need to eat, he said gently. You work too hard. I felt my cheeks warm with embarrassment. I didn't want to seem needy, but I was needy. I accepted the food quietly. Thank you, I said again, not knowing how to say more. In the days that followed, he came regularly. Sometimes he brought tea, sometimes bread, sometimes a tiny flower from his garden. Always something simple, but always thoughtful. I started to wait for him without admitting it to myself. My heart felt warmer when I saw his slow steps approaching the cafe. Yet a part of me remained cautious. He was so much older. His world and mine were nothing alike. So why did he care about me? The question followed me every night, quiet but persistent, like a soft knock at a locked door inside my chest. The rain was stronger that morning, heavy, determined, almost angry as it fell against the cafe windows. I was painting under the small awning outside, trying to keep my brushes dry. My clothes were damp, and the cold kept reaching into my bones no matter how tightly I held myself. When I turned around to rinse my brush, I saw him. Robert. He was sitting on the wooden chair outside the cafe, watching the rain as if it were something familiar and dear to him. His coat was already soaked at the shoulders, yet he didn't seem to mind. Maria, he said softly when I came closer, may I talk with you for a moment? There was something in his voice, still gentle but heavier than before. I nodded and sat down beside him, leaving a respectful distance between us. You work every day, he began, in the cold, in the heat, in the rain, and still, your life remains incredibly hard. I looked down quickly. His words pierced deeper than I expected. No one ever spoke about my life like that, as if it mattered. I'm fine, I said quietly. He shook his head. You are strong, yes, but strength should not be the only thing keeping you alive. A strange fear tightened inside my chest. Why was he telling me this? What did he want from me? He inhaled slowly, then reached into his coat. I wrote something for you, he said, handing me a small white envelope. The paper was clean, perfectly folded, written with care. My fingers trembled as I held it. What is this? A letter, he replied softly. I thought it might be easier to express myself on paper than with too many words. The rain fell even harder. I could barely hear the traffic behind us. Please read it when you are alone, he added. And, think about it. No pressure. No fear. Then he stood, nodded gently, and walked away, leaving me with the envelope and 100 stormy thoughts swirling inside me. That evening, in my tiny room, I finally opened the letter. His handwriting was elegant, slow, almost shy. He wrote about wanting to help me, financially, emotionally, practically. He wrote that he had no family and had lived alone for many years. He wrote that he wished to offer me safety, warmth, a home. And at the end, in the neatest line of all, he wrote something that made my breath stop. He wanted to marry me. My hands shook. My heart pounded painfully. Marriage? With him? Was this kindness? Or a trap? Was he saving me? Or choosing me for reasons I couldn't understand? 1,000 fears filled my mind. But among them was something else. A flicker of hope, fragile but real. A chance for stability. A chance to belong somewhere. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window listening to the rain, clutching the letter, torn between terror and longing. The next afternoon, I found him standing quietly outside the cafe. The rain was soft now, almost gentle. I walked toward him slowly, the letter in my hand. I read it, I whispered. And? He asked, his eyes warm but nervous. My voice barely came out. I will marry you. He didn't move. Then he smiled, slow, sincere, deeply relieved. There were no cheers, no music, no witnesses. Only two people standing in the rain, wrapped in a silence that felt heavier than words, and somehow softer than hope. The wedding took place on a cloudy afternoon, warm and heavy with the scent of approaching rain. There were no guests except for a few of Robert's old acquaintances, people whose names I did not know and whose voices hardly rose above a whisper. No music played. No camera flashed. There was only a small room, a simple ceremony, 2 rings, and 2 people standing beside each other like strangers trying to understand the shape of a new beginning. When the officiant finally said we were married, I felt neither joy nor fear, just a strange, quiet numbness. Robert looked at me with soft, grateful eyes, but he didn't touch me, didn't rush me. He simply said, "Let's go home," in a tone that felt more like an invitation than a command. Home. The word tasted unfamiliar. His house was nothing like the cramped room I had lived in for years. It was small but warm, with wooden floors that creaked gently and shelves filled with books of every size and color. Light spilled through large windows, touching everything softly. The air smelled of old paper, flowers, and the faint sweetness of homemade bread. "This is your home now too," he said quietly as I looked around, unsure whether to smile or cry. That first night, he showed me to a room of my own, a clean bed, soft blankets, a window facing a small garden. "You can rest here. Take all the time you need," he said. He didn't enter the room again. He didn't ask for anything. His respect wrapped around me like the gentlest kind of protection. The early days of our marriage were quiet, almost fragile. We moved through the house carefully, like 2 people learning the steps of a slow, unfamiliar dance. Mornings always began the same way. I would wake to the smell of warm bread. Robert loved baking, and every loaf tasted slightly different, as though he added a different memory each day. "Try this one," he would say, handing me a slice still warm from the oven. Some days we spoke very little. Other days, he told me small stories from his life. About the bookshop he once worked in, about the first rose he planted in his garden, about the lonely winters he spent reading by the fireplace. None of the stories were grand, yet they felt strangely comforting. In the afternoons, he often worked in the garden, humming softly under his breath. One day he offered me a pair of gloves. "Would you like to help?" he asked. I hesitated, then nodded. We spent that afternoon planting herbs, our hands brushing the soil, the silence between us warming gradually. I laughed once when the dirt splashed onto my shoes, and he looked up as if surprised by the sound, then smiled, as though my laughter were a gift he didn't expect to receive. But not everything was peaceful. One morning, while walking to the market alone, I overheard 2 women whispering. "She married him for his money," one said. "Of course she did. Why else would someone so young choose a man his age?" The words hit me like cold water. Shame burned in my chest. I lowered my head and hurried home, carrying their judgment like a heavy stone. Robert noticed my silence immediately. He sat beside me at the kitchen table, his eyes gentle. "People talk," he said softly. "They talk when they don't know the truth. Their words do not decide who we are." Something in me loosened. His understanding, his calmness, his refusal to doubt me. It was the first time I felt truly seen. After that day, something subtle began to shift. The house felt warmer. Meals tasted better. The silence between us became softer, more comfortable, almost intimate. I started to look for him, not out of duty but out of quiet affection. And when he smiled, something inside me bloomed, slowly, shyly, but undeniably real. Love was not loud. It whispered. And in that house full of books and warm bread and gentle mornings, I began to hear it. As the weeks slipped into months, something inside the house, and inside me, began to change. I no longer walked through the rooms like a visitor. My footsteps grew steadier, my breaths lighter. I found myself humming while washing the dishes, smiling without noticing it, waiting for Robert to return from the garden simply because the house felt warmer when he was in it. Robert changed too. He spoke a little more each day, shared more about his memories, laughed softly at my small jokes. His eyes, once full of gentle caution, now held a quiet joy whenever they met mine. The distance between us, so wide at first, had slowly, naturally, beautifully begun to close. Then one morning, everything shifted. I found Robert sitting at the table, pale and sweating lightly, his breath uneven. He tried to hide it, but I saw immediately that something was wrong. "I'm fine," he insisted weakly. "No," I said, the fear rising fast in my chest, "you're not." For the next 2 days, he stayed in bed, weak with fever. And I stayed beside him. I brought him soup and cool cloths, held his hand when he trembled, read to him from one of his old books when he couldn't sleep. I watched his face in the soft light of the lamp, memorizing every line, terrified of losing him. It was then, while wiping his forehead, while listening to his soft breaths, while whispering "Please be okay," that I felt the truth settling in my heart like a warm, undeniable sunrise. I loved him. Not with fear, not with obligation, but with something gentle, deep, and real. When the fever finally broke and he opened his eyes with a tired smile, relief washed through me so strongly that tears slipped down my cheeks. "You stayed with me," he murmured. "Of course I did," I whispered, my voice trembling. I hesitated, then added, I love you, Robert." The room fell silent. Not the cold kind of silence, but a full, living one. His eyes shone with moisture. "And I love you, Maria," he said softly, reaching for my hand with a tenderness that felt like a promise. From that moment on, our life changed. Not dramatically, not with fireworks or grand speeches, but with small, precious things. I painted a picture of our garden one afternoon, the herbs we planted together, the wooden chair under the tree, 2 cups of tea on the small table. I titled it Our Garden. When I gave it to him, he touched the frame as if it were something sacred. He hung it near the front door so we would see it every time we came home. Some evenings, we sat together under the warm yellow light of the lamp, sipping tea while the night wrapped itself around the house like a soft blanket. Robert would read aloud sometimes, his voice steady and calming, while I leaned just a little closer each night. On clear nights, we would step outside hand in hand and look up at the sky. The stars seemed brighter when he stood beside me. He once said, "It feels like they're watching over us," and I believed him. The gossip in town never fully stopped, but it no longer pierced me. Society had its own rules, its own expectations, but love, real love, did not follow them. It didn't ask about age or money or what made sense. It simply grew where kindness lived. One quiet morning, while watering the basil plants, I realized something profound. I had married Robert out of fear of hunger, fear of loneliness, fear of life itself. But I stayed, because of love. Pure, slow, patient love. Months later, we sat together in the garden during the golden hour of the afternoon. The light wrapped around us gently, touching the flowers, the grass, the wrinkles on Robert's hands, and the small smile on my lips. I took his hand and whispered, "We saved each other." He squeezed my fingers softly, his eyes warm as the sunlight. "And that," he said, "is the most beautiful thing."